Ethan Cole slammed $10 million on the table and walked into a home that wasn't his. The penthouse was supposed to be a fresh start. A new city floor, a new view, a new life for him and his 8-year-old daughter after 2 years of silence and grief. But the moment he pushed open that door, he froze. Someone was already living there. Not a stranger, not a squatter. His daughter's teacher. And somehow, in a city of 8 million people, that was the woman who would either save his family or cost him everything he had left. Drop a comment with your city. Let's see how far this story travels. And if you're new here, hit subscribe. You won't want to miss where this goes. The night Ethan Cole lost everything for the second time in 2 years, it started like most disasters in his life with him being absolutely certain he was right. He stood in the elevator of the Alderton, one of Manhattan's most exclusive residential towers, riding up to the 53rd floor, with his jaw set and his eyes fixed on the brushed steel doors. His reflection stared back at him, charcoal suit no tie. The kind of controlled stillness that his business partners read as confidence. And his therapist, the one he'd stopped seeing 14 months ago, had called emotional avoidance. Ethan called it efficiency. He had exactly 4 boxes in the moving truck downstairs, which told you most of what you needed to know about his life right now. A man who had once shared a brownstone in Brooklyn, filled with Christmas decorations, a dog named Biscuit, and the particular warm clutter of a happy family, had reduced himself to 4 boxes. The 5th thing he was bringing into that apartment was asleep against his shoulder. Lily, 8 years old, dark hair fanned across his jacket lapel. One small fist curled under her chin the way it had since she was an infant. She smelled like the strawberry shampoo her mother used to buy in bulk, and Ethan had quietly restocked it every single month for the past 26 months without ever once being able to explain to himself why. He knew why. He just didn't say it out loud. The elevator opened with a soft chime. Floor 53. Ethan shifted Lily's weight carefully. She stirred but didn't wake, and he walked down the hallway with the quiet certainty of a man who had paid his attorney, his real estate broker, and a Manhattan property management firm, a combined sum that could have funded a small country school system. The key card was already in his hand. He stopped at the door marked 53A and held the card to the reader. Green light. Click. He pushed the door open. The first thing that hit him was the smell. Not the sterile vacuumed, staged for showing emptiness he'd been expecting. It was garlic. And something herby rosemary maybe. Warm. The kind of smell that didn't live in bachelor apartments or corporate rentals. The kind of smell that lived in homes. His step slowed without him deciding to slow it. A lamp was on in the living room. Not a staged floor lamp. A small table lamp with a slightly crooked shade. Books were stacked on the kitchen counter. A pair of rain boots, women's small, sat next to the door. A child's drawing crayon on white paper was held to the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like the Statue of Liberty. Ethan stood completely still in the entryway. Lily's eyes drifted open. She looked around, still half asleep, and said very quietly, "Daddy, someone lives here." "I know," he said. He didn't move. Every muscle in his body had shifted into the mode his COO recognized and feared, the complete locked-down stillness that preceded a very bad Tuesday for someone. Then a voice came from the kitchen. "I told you I'd have it done by 9. Yes, the boxes are by the window. I just need—" A woman walked out of the kitchen holding a phone to her ear and a wooden spoon in her other hand. She stopped. She stared at him. He stared at her. She had flour on her left cheekbone, reading glasses pushed up on her head. Dark hair pulled back in the kind of careless way that suggested it had started the day in a proper bun and simply given up by evening. She was wearing an oversized gray sweater and looked in the most disorienting way possible, like she absolutely belonged in this apartment. The wooden spoon was still raised. "I'll call you back," she said into the phone and lowered it slowly. Silence. Then, "Who are you?" Ethan said, with the precision of a man who had rehearsed exactly nothing for this scenario. "I own this apartment." She blinked. "No," she said. "You don't." I assure you. I signed a 12-month lease, she said, and her voice had gone from startled to firm in about 3 seconds flat. 4 weeks ago. I have documentation. Then someone made a serious error, Ethan said, because I closed on this property last Thursday. She stared at him. He stared at her. Lily, now fully awake, was looking between them like she was watching a very confusing tennis match. And then Lily said in a small, surprised voice, "Miss Bennett." The woman's face changed completely. The defensive posture dropped. Her eyes went wide, then soft, and she crouched down to Lily's level with the automatic warmth of someone who had done this 10,000 times. "Lily," she said, and her voice was completely different now. The firmness gone, replaced with something gentle and real. "Hey, sweetheart. What are you doing here?" "I'm moving here," Lily said with the matter-of-fact gravity that only 8-year-olds can deliver. "This is my new home. Daddy bought it." The woman, Miss Bennett, looked up at Ethan. Ethan looked down at her, and for the first time all night, possibly for the first time in 2 years, he had absolutely no idea what to do next. Her name was Claire Bennett. He'd heard the name before in the brief, data-efficient way he processed most information about Lily's school life. 3rd-grade teacher. Good reviews from the other parents, not that Ethan had asked, but he'd overheard enough at pickup to construct a rough profile. The one who stayed late. The one who made the reading corner. The one who'd sent home that handwritten note when Lily had a hard week in October, the kind of note that Ethan had read standing in the parking lot, and then folded very carefully and put in his jacket pocket and not spoken of again. He hadn't connected the name to a face, because he had never, he realized now with a specific quality of shame, actually attended a parent-teacher conference. He'd sent his assistant. Twice. "Okay," Claire said once Lily had fallen back asleep on the couch under a blanket that was definitively Claire's. "Okay, let's start over." She had her laptop open on the kitchen counter and was pulling up emails with the systematic focus of someone determined to keep their hands busy. "I paid a security deposit and first and last month's rent to a company called Alderton Property Solutions. I have all of it here." Ethan had his own phone out. "The broker I used was called Alderton Residential Group." They looked at each other. "That's not the same company," Claire said. "No," Ethan said. "It's not." The silence that followed had a specific texture, the particular quiet of two people independently arriving at a conclusion that is going to cause a significant amount of inconvenience. "We got scammed," she said. "You got scammed," Ethan said. "I bought the property. The deed is in my name. I have the paperwork." Her chin came up. "I have a legal lease. Signed with a company that doesn't exist. That I didn't know didn't exist." A beat. "I'm a 3rd-grade teacher, Mr. Cole." She paused. Something moved across her face. "Ethan Cole." "Yes." "Lily Cole's father." "Yes." She closed her laptop very slowly. "Of course you are," she said in a tone that wasn't quite irony and wasn't quite despair, but lived somewhere in between. Ethan pulled out his phone and dialed his attorney. It was 9:47 at night. Marcus picked up on the second ring because that was what Ethan paid him for. "I have a situation," Ethan said. Across the counter, Claire was doing the same thing, calling someone, her voice low, and Ethan caught the words, "lease" and "fraud," and "I don't have anywhere else to go tonight," in a way that he wasn't supposed to hear but did, and something shifted slightly in his chest that he immediately identified as irrelevant. He focused on Marcus. "The property is mine," Marcus confirmed inside of 4 minutes. "Clean title. But if she has a signed lease even with a fraudulent party, she may have legal standing to contest immediate removal. Don't touch anything. Don't make any requests for her to leave tonight. It could complicate things." "How long will this take?" "To sort out legally. 2-3 weeks. Maybe more." Ethan lowered the phone. Claire was watching him. Her phone was in her hand. She'd heard enough of his end to understand. 2 weeks, he said. "I heard. My attorney advises that I can't ask you to leave while the fraud investigation is pending." She nodded slowly. My building already found a new tenant for my old apartment. I gave notice. She said it flatly without self-pity, which somehow made it worse. I don't have a backup. The penthouse was 5,300 square feet, 4 bedrooms. Ethan had chosen it specifically because it was more space than 2 people needed, and he'd wanted Lily to have room that the Brooklyn brownstone had been too full of memory to provide. He looked at the living room where his daughter was asleep on a stranger's blanket. He thought about what Marcus had said. He thought about the 87 other things he needed to handle this week. And then he said in a tone that made absolutely clear this was logistics and nothing else. There are 4 bedrooms. You'll stay until the legal situation is resolved. We'll establish ground rules in the morning. Claire looked at him for a long moment. I don't need your charity, she said. It's not charity. My attorney told me not to ask you to leave. I'm following legal advice. Another long look. Fine, she said. Ground rules in the morning. She picked up the wooden spoon from the counter, went back into the kitchen, and turned down whatever was on the stove. Ethan stood in the entryway of his new apartment, his 5,300 square foot, $10 million fresh start, and listened to someone else's dinner simmering on his stove. It smelled against every reasonable objection he could mount, like coming home. The ground rules as Ethan presented them the following morning were precise. He'd written them on his phone at 5:15 a.m. because he'd slept approximately 90 minutes and had needed something to do with his hands that wasn't standing at the window watching the city. Claire sat across from him at the kitchen island. The kitchen island she had already, he noted, stocked with coffee, and listened with her hands wrapped around a mug and her expression carefully neutral. Separate schedules where possible, he said. You have Lily's school hours. I'm typically out of the apartment by 6:30 a.m. and back by... He paused, then completed the sentence honestly. Whenever. Whenever, she repeated. Shared spaces are kitchen and living room. I'll have the master bedroom on the east side. You'll have the second bedroom. Lily is in the third. What about the fourth? My office. Of course. She took a sip of coffee. Anything else? This is a temporary arrangement. I'd prefer it didn't become something that requires conversation. She set down her mug. Mr. Cole, she said in the patient, specific tone of a woman who spent her professional life managing people who weren't listening to her. I am going to be honest with you. I am not thrilled about this either. I found a place that I thought was mine. I unpacked my books, I put up one piece of art, and now I'm sitting in my kitchen having ground rules read to me like I'm a junior employee. She paused. But Lily is my student. She's a good kid who's been through something enormous, and I would rather eat glass than make her life harder. So yes, separate schedules, shared spaces, temporary arrangement. She picked up her mug again. I would add one rule of my own. He waited. Don't check your phone during breakfast. He looked at her. She's 8, Claire said simply. She notices. Ethan said nothing. He put his phone face down on the counter. Claire nodded once like a point had been settled and got up to start breakfast. From down the hallway came the sound of small feet hitting the floor, and then Lily appeared in the kitchen doorway in her pajamas, the ones with the owls rubbing one eye with her fist. She looked at Claire. She looked at her father. She looked at Claire again. And then, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. Are you making pancakes? I was going to, Claire said. Lily climbed onto a bar stool. Daddy burns them, she said in the offhand way of someone reporting weather. I don't burn them, Ethan said. Lily looked at him with the gentle pity of a child who loves you anyway. You always burn them, Daddy. Claire turned to hide what might have been the beginning of a smile. Ethan sat down at this kitchen island in his own kitchen, in his own apartment, while his daughter's teacher made pancakes, and for 60 seconds he did not look at his phone. It was the longest 60 seconds he'd had in 2 years. And somewhere underneath the discomfort and the exhaustion and the very legitimate legal complexity of the situation, somewhere underneath all of that was a feeling he didn't name yet. But it sat there, quiet and warm, like something that had been cold for a very long time, just beginning to thaw. The building manager confirmed it by noon. Alderton Property Solutions. The company Claire had leased from was a ghost. A website, a phone number that now rang to nothing, and a bank account that had been drained and closed before either of them had known to look. The police report was filed. The fraud investigation was open. The legal timeline was what Marcus had said, weeks, possibly more. Ethan's attorney was thorough and expensive, and sent a 9-page summary email by 3 p.m. Claire received a 3-sentence response from the legal aid office she'd called, suggesting she document everything. Ethan saw this not because he was reading her emails, but because she'd printed it out, and it was sitting on the counter, and said nothing because there was nothing useful to say. He arranged through his firm for a forensic audit of the rental fraud network. He didn't tell her he'd done that. He wasn't sure why. By the end of the first week, the Penthouse had organized itself into a rhythm that Ethan hadn't authorized but couldn't quite argue against. Claire kept the kitchen in a state of operational readiness that he suspected exceeded his own. Lily did her homework at the kitchen island, while Claire graded papers 3 feet away. Ethan worked in his office with the door closed until 8 or 9, and when he came out, the kitchen was clean. Lily was in bed, and Claire was usually in the chair by the window reading. He didn't talk to her. He got a glass of water, or he poured 2 fingers of bourbon and took it back to his office. But one night Thursday, 11 days in, he came out at 11 p.m., and she was asleep in the chair book, open on her lap, and all the lights were low, and the whole apartment had the particular quiet of a place where a child is sleeping safely. Ethan stood there for a moment. He took the book off her lap without waking her. She didn't stir. She was deeply asleep in the way people sleep when they're running on empty, and he put a bookmark in it and set it on the table. And then he went to bed. And he lay there, staring at the ceiling, and thinking about a feeling he hadn't had in 2 years, the feeling of not being the only person in the building watching over his daughter while she slept. He didn't know what to call it. He decided for now to call it nothing. But the ceiling had nothing useful to offer him, and the city hummed 40 floors below, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, Ethan Cole did not feel entirely alone in the dark. 3 weeks into what Ethan's attorney called the interim arrangement, and what Ethan called a logistical complication, he started noticing things he didn't want to notice, small things mostly. The way Lily had started setting 3 places at the breakfast table instead of 2 without anyone asking her to. The way she'd stopped going straight to her room after school and instead sat at the kitchen island doing her homework while Claire moved around the kitchen behind her, not hovering, not directing, just present. The particular ease of it. The way Lily talked now more than she had in months about small things, pointless things. The kind of chatter that 8-year-olds are supposed to fill houses with, and that Ethan had been quietly, desperately missing without ever letting himself say so. He noticed all of it. He cataloged it the way he cataloged everything efficiently, without sentiment, and he filed it under a category he labeled temporary, will resolve. What he couldn't file as easily was the Thursday morning Lily came to breakfast in 2 different shoes. He was already standing at the counter with his coffee when she appeared, 1 navy sneaker, 1 white one, completely unaware. She climbed onto the bar stool and reached for the orange juice, and Ethan opened his mouth to say something, and then Claire came in from the hallway, took 1 look at Lily's feet, and said without missing a beat, "Go back and try again, Bug, unless you're starting a trend." Lily looked down, looked up, grinned, and disappeared back down the hallway at a run. Ethan said nothing. Claire poured herself coffee. Then, without looking at him, she said, "She's been distracted in the mornings. I think she's not sleeping great. She hasn't said anything to me." "She wouldn't." A pause. Not unkind, just honest. "She's trying not to worry you." He set down his mug. "She's 8. "I know," Claire said. "That's kind of the point." He didn't answer. Lily came back 2 matching shoes and climbed back on the bar stool, and Claire slid a plate toward her, and the conversation moved on the way it always did in the morning, quick and small and ordinary. But that evening, instead of going straight to his office, Ethan sat on the edge of Lily's bed. She looked up from her book, surprised. "You sleep okay?" he asked. She thought about it, the specific serious consideration of a child deciding how honest to be. "Sometimes I wake up," she said finally, "and I forget where I am." He nodded slowly. "Because it's new." "Yeah." She looked at him. "And then I remember, and it's okay." A pause. "Miss Bennett leaves the hall light on, so I can see under the door." Ethan looked at his daughter for a long moment. He thought about all the nights he'd assumed she was fine because she hadn't said she wasn't. He thought about the hall light, the one he'd walked past a dozen times without thinking about it, and what it meant that someone had noticed what his daughter needed in the dark and simply quietly done something about it. "Good," he said finally. His voice came out rougher than he intended. "That's good." He kissed her forehead, turned off her lamp, and stood in the doorway for a second longer than usual before he pulled the door most of the way closed. The hall light was on. He left it. The weeks moved. The fraud case moved slower. Marcus sent updates that were thorough and unsatisfying, the kind of legal progress that looks like a lot of paper and feels like standing still. The man behind Alderton Property Solutions had been identified, a repeat offender working a rental scam across 3 boroughs, but recovering money took time, and the question of Claire's legal standing in the apartment remained technically unresolved. "Best case," Marcus said over the phone, "another 4 to 6 weeks. And worst case." A pause. "Longer." Ethan relayed this to Claire that evening with the same tone he used for quarterly earnings reports, just the numbers, none of the weight behind them. She listened, nodded, and said, "Okay," in the specific way that meant she was processing something she wasn't going to discuss in front of him. What he didn't say was that his attorney had quietly confirmed that Ethan could, if he chose, pursue a faster track to have her removed while the investigation was ongoing. It would be complicated. She might contest it. But it was possible. He hadn't asked Marcus to pursue it. He told himself it was because the legal complexity wasn't worth the effort. He told himself it was because disrupting Lily's routine further during the school year was inadvisable. He told himself a lot of things at 11 p.m., with 2 fingers of bourbon standing at the window looking at the city. The city did not tell him anything useful. The other thing he noticed, the thing he was significantly less willing to catalog, was Claire herself. Not in any way he intended. It wasn't like that. He was a man who had loved his wife completely and lost her, and sealed that part of himself with the focused, airtight efficiency he brought to every other problem. There was nothing left to open. But he noticed things the way you notice weather, not because you're looking for it, but because it's there. The way she pushed back. Not dramatically, not constantly, but cleanly, without apology, in the specific way of a person who knew her own worth and didn't need you to confirm it. The way she was one person with Lily, and a different person with him, softer in one direction, sharper in the other, and somehow completely consistent in both. The way she'd once said during a disagreement about the thermostat that had gotten oddly pointed. "You can't just optimize everything, Ethan. Some things don't have a correct setting." He'd said, 68 degrees is the correct setting. She'd said, "I didn't mean the thermostat." And she'd walked away before he could figure out how to respond to that. He thought about it for 3 days. What cracked the surface first wasn't a conversation between him and Claire. It was a phone call. He was in his office, door closed as usual, and he had it on speaker low while he was reading through a contract. His sister-in-law, Diane. His late wife's younger sister, who had always liked him in a restrained, conditional way, and who now primarily existed in his life as the family member. He had to update quarterly, so she didn't feel cut out. "Lily sounded different on the phone last week," Diane said. "Better, lighter maybe. She's adjusting to the new school year." "Is that all it is?" Something in her tone made him stop reading. "What do you mean?" "I mean she mentioned her teacher 3 times in a 10-minute phone call," Diane said. "Miss Bennett this and Miss Bennett that. I'm just saying Lily's never talked about a teacher that much." "She's a good teacher," Ethan said evenly. A pause. "Ethan, is there something you're not telling me?" He considered the full explanation. The penthouse, the fraud, the shared living situation, the pancakes, the hall light, and decided against it. Not because he was hiding anything, because the full story required more words than he currently had the patience for. "Everything is fine," he said. "You sound like you always sound," Diane said, which was not a compliment. After he hung up, he sat in the quiet of his office for a while. And then, without entirely meaning to, he opened his door. Claire was at the kitchen island. She had a stack of papers in front of her student work red pen in hand, and she was reading something that was apparently either deeply wrong or deeply funny, because she had the expression of someone trying to decide between those two emotions. She looked up when he came in. "Working late," she said. "I work late every night." "I know," she said. "I've noticed." He got water from the tap, stood at the counter, didn't go back to his office. After a minute, she held up the paper she was reading. Third-grade essay on the American Revolution. This child believes Paul Revere was a DJ. He looked at her. A DJ. Quote, "He rode his horse to drop the news." She set it down with a look of pure professional affection. "I mean, he's not wrong." Ethan felt something happen in his chest, that he didn't expect, something brief and involuntary and genuine. It took him a moment to identify it. He'd almost laughed. He hadn't almost laughed in a long time. He put down his glass. "My daughter is doing well in your class," he said formally, "a little late the way you pay a debt you've been meaning to get to." Claire looked at him steadily. "She is. She's smart, and she's kind, and she works hard." A pause. "She also doesn't ask for help when she needs it." He knew that was aimed at him as much as Lily. "She'll learn," he said. "Will she? Not aggressive. Just open. Like she actually wanted to know the answer." He didn't have one. He picked up his water glass and went back to his office. But he left the door open. He told himself it was ventilation. The parent forum was the first sign that the outside world had started paying attention. He found out about it from Marcus, of all people, who'd seen it flagged in a social media monitoring report his firm ran on executive reputational risk. A thread on a private school parent forum, the kind that runs on a mixture of genuine concern and very expensive social anxiety, with a title that made Ethan's jaw tighten. Anyone else notice Cole and Ms. Bennett seem awfully close at drop-off? He read it once. Then he set his phone down and stood very still for a moment. The thread was careful. Nobody was saying anything actionable. Just observations. "I saw them arrive at the same time 3 days in a row. He always seemed to know where she was in the room. She stayed late for pickup last week, and he was the last car." The particular architecture of insinuation, nothing stated, everything implied. He went to Claire. She was doing dishes. She listened without turning around. When he finished, she turned off the tap. "I've seen it," she said. Yesterday. One of the other teachers mentioned it." She dried her hands, turned around. "I was going to tell you." "Why didn't you?" She looked at him with an expression that was partly patience and partly something else. "Because I was trying to figure out how to say it without it being a whole thing." "This is a whole thing," he said. "I know that now." He pulled out his chair at the island and sat. First time he'd voluntarily sat in the kitchen for a reason other than coffee. "What are the actual stakes for you?" "My contract," she said plainly. "The school has a morality clause. It's broad and it's old and it shouldn't apply here because there's nothing, a slight emphasis, clean and clear to apply it to. But if the board decides the optics are problematic, they could open a review." He looked at her. "Over nothing. Over the appearance of something." She sat down across from him. "That's how these things work. You know that." He did know that. He lived in that world professionally. The difference between what was true and what could be made to look true was something he navigated every quarter. "I'll make a statement," he said. "Clarify the situation publicly. The fraud case is on record. I can release that documentation. And tell the entire parent body that I was scammed out of my housing and moved in with a student's father." She tilted her head. "That helps how?" He stopped. She was right. He was doing what he always did, going immediately to the solution that cost money or leverage without reading the room. "Then what do you want to do?" he said. It came out differently than he intended. Less like a strategic question, more like he actually wanted to know. Claire was quiet for a moment. When she answered, her voice was careful but honest. "I want to not lose the job I've had for 6 years because of something that happened to me, not something I did." "Okay," he said. "That's reasonable." "I know it's reasonable," she said. "I'm just not sure reasonable is what's going to matter here." They sat at the kitchen island in the quiet apartment, and for once, Ethan Cole didn't have a plan. He didn't have a next move or a contingency or a sentence ready for the silence. He just sat there thinking. And Claire sat across from him, and she didn't fill the silence either. It was in a strange way the most honest conversation he'd had with another adult in longer than he could remember. It was Lily who moved the pieces nobody else could move. It happened on a Saturday morning, which was the one day Ethan had committed on paper to nobody, just internally to being present. No calls before 9. No laptop at breakfast. He'd made the rule for himself 3 weeks in and had broken it 5 times already and kept it twice. And this particular Saturday, he was making his second attempt at the French toast that Lily had told him diplomatically needed work. The bread was too thick. He knew it. He was refusing to acknowledge it. Lily was sitting on the counter, which Claire had told her twice not to do, and which she did anyway when Claire wasn't looking, watching him with the particular focus of a child who has appointed herself food critic. "How do you know when it's done?" she asked. "Color," he said. "You watch the color." "Miss Bennett says you go by smell." "Miss Bennett and I can disagree about French toast." Lily swung her feet. "Do you like her?" she asked in the completely unfiltered way of an 8-year-old who has not yet learned that some questions are loaded. Ethan turned the toast. "She's fine." "That's not what I asked." He glanced at her. "She's a good person." Lily considered this. "Mommy was a good person." "Yes," he said. "She was." A pause. The toast sizzled. Outside, the city moved. "Daddy?" Lily said in a smaller voice now. "Do you think Mommy would be mad? That Miss Bennett lives here?" He turned the burner down, turned to his daughter. She was looking at her hands. "No," he said. "I don't think Mommy would be mad." "How do you know?" He thought about that. He thought about his wife. Really thought about her, not the careful, managed way he usually allowed himself, but fully the way she actually was. Her laugh. The way she'd made friends with strangers in elevators. The way she'd talked about Lily's teachers at dinner, like they were mutual friends. The way she had always wanted the people she loved to have more warmth in their lives. "Because Mommy always wanted us to be okay," he said. That was the thing she wanted most. Lily looked up at him. "Are we okay?" He held her gaze for a moment. Really held. It didn't deflect, didn't optimize, didn't turn it into a shorter conversation than it needed to be. "We're getting there," he said. She seemed to accept that. She slid off the counter, wrapped her arms around his middle without warning. Just held on the way she used to when she was much smaller and much more willing to need him. And he stood there with one hand on her back, and the French toast sat on the burner, and neither of them said anything else. When Claire appeared in the kitchen doorway a few minutes later, she took in the scene: Ethan at the stove, Lily at his side, the slightly too dark toast, and she didn't say anything either. She just went to the coffee maker. But before she turned away, she caught his eye for just a moment. She didn't smile, just looked at him. He didn't look away. And that was the moment, quiet, unremarkable from the outside. The sort of thing no one would ever be able to point to and say, there, that was it, when something in Ethan Cole stopped running in the opposite direction. He didn't name it. He wasn't ready to name it. But he stopped running. And somewhere in the city, outside 8 million people, living their 8 million lives, the morning kept going, indifferent and bright, the way mornings in Manhattan always do. The toast was definitively too dark. Lily ate 2 pieces anyway. The school fundraiser was Claire's idea originally, or rather, it was the school's idea, and Claire was on the organizing committee, which meant she'd spent 3 weeks coordinating silent auction items and catering logistics and the particular diplomatic nightmare of getting 12 sets of parents to agree on a venue. Ethan had received the invitation the same way he received most school communications forwarded by his assistant with a flag that said, "Action required, RSVP." He'd intended to send a check and a polite decline. He went instead. He told himself it was because Lily had asked him to. Which was true. What was also true, and what he did not examine too closely, was that Lily had asked him to go to the fall concert 2 years running, and he'd sent his assistant both times. Something had changed in his calculus, and he knew it, and he was choosing not to look directly at it, the way you choose not to look directly at the sun. The event was held in the school's main hall, transformed for the evening with the specific overachievement of a parent body that had more money than it knew what to do with. He arrived in a suit because he always arrived in a suit. He found Claire near the registration table, clipboard in hand, talking to the caterer, with the focused intensity of someone managing 17 things at once. She saw him come in. Something crossed her face, surprise maybe, or something adjacent to it, and then she said something to the caterer and walked over. "You came," she said. "Lily asked me to." "She did." A pause. "She also told me, and I'm quoting here, that you'd probably cancel." "She's 8, he said. "She doesn't know everything." Claire looked at him with the expression he'd come to recognize, the one that meant she was deciding how honest to be. "She knows a fair amount," she said, and let it sit there. The evening moved. The way these things move: cocktail hour, small talk. The kind of conversation Ethan navigated professionally, and found personally exhausting parents introducing themselves to him with the specific energy of people who had Googled him beforehand. He was good at it. He'd been good at it for 20 years. He said the right things, asked the right questions, smiled at the right moments, and felt, as he always did in rooms like this, like he was watching himself from a slight distance. Claire moved through the same room differently. She knew everybody's name. Not just the children, the parents, the grandparents who'd come along, the catering staff. She stopped and talked to people like she had all the time in the world, which Ethan knew she didn't, because she was running the event. But she made each person feel like the conversation was the only thing happening. He watched her do it without meaning to watch. At one point she caught him watching and raised an eyebrow. He looked away. They ended up near each other again by the silent auction table, not by design, just the natural drift of a room, and she said without looking at him, "You're doing the thing." "What thing?" "The thing where you're physically present and mentally somewhere else entirely." He considered denying it. "I'm here." "Your body is," she said. She picked up a bid sheet, scanned it. "Your face looks like a quarterly earnings call." "My face looks exactly the same as it always does." "I know," she said. "That's what I mean." He almost said something sharp. Then he didn't. Because she wasn't wrong, and on some level, he was tired, genuinely tired of being right in ways that kept him alone in a room full of people. "What would you have me do differently?" he asked. It came out more direct than he intended, more open. She looked at him then. Really looked at him the way she occasionally did, without the professional distance or the careful neutrality, just straight at him, like he was a person and not a variable to be managed. "Talk to someone like you want to know the answer," she said, "not like you're running a meeting." He didn't respond immediately. Around them, the auction table hummed with low conversation bids going up in polite increments, the background noise of wealth doing what it does. "That's harder than it sounds," he said finally. "I know," she said, and her voice was quieter now. "I know it is." Someone called her name from across the room. She squeezed past him briefly, her shoulder brushing his arm, and went back to running her event. Ethan stood at the auction table and looked down at the bid sheet in front of him. An original watercolor by a local artist. He wrote his number and a bid that was significantly higher than the current top offer and moved on. He didn't look at what he'd bid on. He found out later it was a painting of a kitchen window with light coming through it. He had Marcus process the payment without comment. Bruneg. The photograph ran on a Tuesday. He saw it at 6:40 a.m., which was when he saw most things that were going to ruin his day standing at the kitchen counter. Coffee in hand, doing a sweep of his notifications before the apartment woke up. A local society blog, the kind that covered charity events and restaurant openings and the private lives of people with money, had run a piece on the fundraiser. Mostly promotional. 2 photographs. The second one was him and Claire standing at the auction table. She was looking across the room. He was looking at her. It was a 3-second moment from a 4-hour evening, and in the photograph it looked like something it wasn't. Or maybe it looked like something he hadn't admitted yet. He pushed that thought aside. The caption read, "Ethan Cole, CEO of Cole Capital and Westside Academy teacher Claire Bennett, share a quiet moment at last Thursday's fundraiser." Sources close to the school say the two have been close since the fall semester began. He put his coffee down. He read it again, slower. Then he called Marcus. "I've seen it," Marcus said before Ethan could speak. "It's a gossip blog, low reach technically." Technically. It's been picked up by 2 other outlets this morning. One of them has a larger following. Ethan was quiet for a moment. "What's the exposure?" "Reputational manageable for you. You're a private citizen who attended a school event. There's nothing there." A pause. "For her, it's more complicated." The morality clause. "If the board decides to make something of it, yes." He hung up, stood in the kitchen. The apartment was still quiet. Claire's door was closed. Lily wasn't up yet. The city outside was doing what the city always did, which was move forward without waiting for anyone to be ready. He went to his office, pulled up the article again, read it twice more. Then he started drafting a statement, a clean, factual account of the housing fraud, the legal situation, the reason for the shared living arrangement. Something that would make clear to anyone reading that what the photograph implied was not what was happening. He had 4 paragraphs written when his phone rang. Diane. He picked up because not picking up would be worse. "I saw the article," she said. "It's a gossip blog." Ethan. Diane. "I'm not calling to lecture you." A pause. "I'm calling because Margaret saw it." Margaret was his mother-in-law, his late wife's mother. A woman of considerable warmth and considerable will, who had been since her daughter's death, the central figure in a family that was trying to hold itself together around a wound nobody knew how to talk about. "What did she say?" Ethan asked carefully. "She said she'd like to speak with her lawyer about Lily." The room seemed to contract. "About custody," Diane said, and her voice was careful in the way of someone delivering news they don't want to deliver. She didn't say she was filing anything, but she mentioned that Lily's living situation might need to be reviewed, given the circumstances. He set down his pen. "The circumstances are a fraud investigation." "I know that." "There is nothing." He stopped, controlled his voice, started again. "There is nothing inappropriate happening." "I know that too," Diane said. "But Ethan, you have to see how it looks from her side. She lost her daughter. Lily is all she has left of Sarah, and she sees a photograph and reads a caption, and what assumes I've forgotten her daughter." The words came out harder than he intended. Silence on the line. "No," Diane said quietly. "She assumes you're moving on, and she doesn't know what that means for Lily." He stood at his desk for a long moment after they hung up. He looked at the 4 paragraphs he'd drafted. Then he looked at his phone. Then he looked at the window. He thought about Margaret, who had held Lily every single weekend in the first year, who had driven 3 hours to be there for every school event Ethan had missed, who had shown up in every gap he'd left without ever once saying, "You're failing her." And he thought this was going to get worse before it got better. He heard movement in the hallway. Claire's door. He listened to her go to the kitchen. The sound of the coffee maker. The domestic ordinary of it. And for one sharp moment, he felt the full weight of what he'd brought into her life by doing nothing to stop this sooner. He went to the kitchen. She had her phone out. She'd already seen it. She didn't say anything when he came in. Just poured a second mug and set it on the counter where he'd stand, and waited. "The school board is meeting Friday," he said. "Marcus confirmed it this morning." She wrapped both hands around her mug. "I know. Principal Hartman called me last night." "Why didn't you tell me?" "It was 11 o'clock, she said. "You were working." Claire. She looked at him. There it was again, that directness, that refusal to flinch. "What would you have done at 11 o'clock? Ethan called Marcus. Drafted a memo. You can't fix this one with paperwork." He sat down, the stool across from her. He didn't say anything because she wasn't wrong. "What did Hartman say exactly?" he asked. "That the board has received complaints from 2-parent families, that they have a responsibility to investigate, that in the meantime he wants me to consider my position." She said the last 3 words with a precise, controlled flatness that told him exactly how much they had cost her to repeat. "He asked you to consider resigning." He didn't ask. He suggested. Ethan's jaw tightened. "He has no grounds. He has optics," she said. "Which I told you weeks ago is what matters." He remembered. He remembered sitting at this same island, her saying, "That's how these things work." He'd thought he understood then. He understood it differently now, the way you understand the difference between reading about something and standing in it. "I'm going to the board meeting," he said. "Ethan, I'll bring the documentation. All of it. The fraud case, the police report, the legal timeline. Everything that explains what actually happened." She was quiet for a moment. "If you do that," she said slowly, "you're making this public. Your name, the scam, the living arrangement, it's all going to come out." "It's already out. Not in detail." She looked at him steadily. "Your company, your reputation, the story of a CEO who got defrauded and didn't catch it for 3 weeks, that's a different headline than a gossip blog caption." He met her gaze. "I know that. And you'd still do it." He didn't answer immediately. He thought about it, really thought about it, not the strategy of it, but the thing underneath the strategy. Why he'd go. What it would cost. Whether the cost was the kind you could recover from, or the kind that changed the shape of things permanently. "Yes," he said. "I would." She looked at him for a long moment. Something moved through her expression. Something he didn't quite catch before she looked down at her coffee. "You shouldn't do it for me," she said quietly. "I'm not doing it for you," he said. "I'm doing it because it's the truth, and because—" He stopped, tried again. "Because I have let things go uncorrected for too long, in a lot of areas." She didn't ask what he meant. He thought she probably understood. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, the city was fully awake now. All 8 million people moving at their particular speeds. And here in the 53rd floor of the Alderton, 2 people sat across a kitchen island, and neither of them pretended for the moment that things were simple. He didn't tell Lily any of it. She was 8, and she didn't need to carry this, and one of the few things Ethan was certain he was doing right was keeping his daughter out of the weight of it. But children hear things. They absorb the frequency of a household the way they absorb everything, not always the words, but the weather of it. The barometric pressure of a home where adults are managing something large. Wednesday night, he came out of his office at 10 to find the living room empty and dark, and he assumed Claire had gone to bed. He was standing at the kitchen sink when he heard voices low from down the hallway. He moved toward them without thinking. Claire's door was half open, a slice of lamplight on the hallway floor. He stopped outside the door. Didn't go in. Lily's voice, "But what if they make you leave the school?" Claire's voice, "That's not going to happen. But what if it does?" A pause. "Then I'd find another school. Teaching is what I do that doesn't go away." "But you wouldn't be my teacher anymore." Lily's voice small now. "You'd be gone." Another pause longer. "Lily." "Everybody leaves," Lily said. "Mommy left. And I know she didn't want to. I know that. But she left. And I'm always scared that if I like someone a lot, they're going to leave too. Silence. Then Claire's voice very quiet. I know. I know that's scary. Do you promise you won't leave? A long moment. He could hear Claire choosing her words the way someone chooses footing on uncertain ground. I promise that I will not leave because of anything that's happening right now. Okay. What's happening is complicated and grown up, and it has nothing to do with you. You didn't do anything wrong. I know I didn't do anything wrong, Lily said. I'm 8, not a baby. A soft sound, Claire laughing just barely. Right, sorry. It's okay. The rustle of blankets. Will you stay until I fall asleep? Yeah, Claire said. I'll stay. Ethan stood in the hallway for a long moment after that. He didn't move. He didn't breathe particularly carefully. He just stood there in the dark outside his daughter's room and felt something give way inside him, not dramatically, not with any noise, just the way ice gives way in spring, quietly and all at once, and with the strange relief of something that's been holding tension for a very long time finally releasing. He thought about the 2 years since Sarah died, the 2 years he had managed and optimized and kept moving, because moving was the only thing that felt survivable. He thought about all the nights Lily had gone to sleep in a house where the lights were off and the hallways were dark because he hadn't thought to leave them on. He thought about parent-teacher conferences he'd sent his assistant to, and breakfast tables with phones face up, and all the ways he had been physically present and emotionally 1,000 miles away. He had told himself that providing was the same as being there. He had told himself that working was the same as protecting. He had told himself in the particular way of men who are afraid and don't have a word for it, that Lily was fine because she wasn't saying she wasn't. She hadn't been saying she wasn't because she was trying not to worry him. She was 8 years old and she had been protecting him. He leaned against the hallway wall, closed his eyes. In the room behind the door, he heard Claire's voice, low and steady, reading something he couldn't make out the words, just the rhythm of it, and Lily's voice going quiet, the way it did when she was almost asleep. He stood there until the light under Claire's door went off. He heard her come to the doorway. She stopped when she saw him. They looked at each other in the dark hallway. He didn't say anything. She didn't either. But she saw his face, and she understood, and she didn't look away. After a moment, she said very quietly, so as not to wake Lily, "She's okay." "I know," he said. His voice was not entirely steady. It's not her I was thinking about." Claire looked at him. "I've been terrible at this," he said. "At being here, at being—" He stopped, tried again. "She's been managing me, a child. My daughter has been managing me." Claire didn't offer anything easy. She didn't say you've done your best, or it's been hard for everyone. She just stood in the hallway and looked at him honestly, which was the most useful thing anyone had offered him in 2 years. "You're here now," she said finally. "I've been here," he said. "I've been physically here." "No," she said gently but clearly. "You haven't been, but you are right now." A pause. "That counts, Ethan. It's not nothing." He looked at her. In the dark hallway, in the apartment that belonged to him, and also somehow to her and to Lily, with the city 40 floors below, and the legal case unresolved, and the board meeting 2 days away, and his mother-in-law considering lawyers in the middle of all of that, he looked at Claire Bennett and thought, "I have not been fair to this person, to any of them." "Thank you," he said, "for the hall light." She blinked, hadn't expected that. "Lily told me," he said, "the first week, that you left it on so she could see under the door." Claire was quiet for a moment. "It's a small thing." "It wasn't," he said. She held his gaze for a beat longer than comfortable. Then she nodded once the same way she'd nodded weeks ago over coffee and ground rules, the gesture that meant something had been settled. She went back to her room. He stood in the hallway alone, and the apartment was quiet, and his daughter was asleep with the sound of Claire's voice still in the air. And Ethan Cole, who had not cried at his wife's funeral, who had not cried in the parking lot, reading the handwritten note, who had not cried in all the long nights of the past 2 years, stood in a hallway at 11:30 p.m. and let himself feel the full weight of everything he had not allowed himself to feel. Not for long. He was still who he was, but for a moment he stopped holding it up alone. And in the morning, he was going to walk into that board meeting, and he was going to tell the truth. He was up at 4:30 the morning of the board meeting, not because he'd set an alarm, because he hadn't slept. He sat at the kitchen island in the dark with his laptop open and the fraud documentation spread across the counter. Police report, legal timeline, Marcus's 9-page summary. The original property deed with the closing date clearly stamped the email chain between Claire and the ghost company that had taken her money and vanished. Everything organized, the way he organized everything clean, sequential, irrefutable. He'd done this kind of preparation before. He'd walked into boardrooms with hostile shareholders, SEC, inquiries acquisition negotiations where the other side had come loaded for war. He knew how to build a case. He knew how to walk into a room and make the truth so visible that there was no comfortable place left to stand if you wanted to deny it. What he hadn't done before was build a case that would cost him something real to present. Marcus had been clear on the phone the previous evening. If you walk in there and lay out this whole situation, the fraud, the living arrangement, the timeline you are handing every financial reporter in the city, a story about Ethan Cole getting scammed on a $10 million property deal. The due diligence questions alone will run for weeks. I know, Ethan had said. The board clears her based on this, which they should, but you take the hit. I know, Marcus. A pause. This woman is a schoolteacher. She's also telling the truth, Ethan said. And nobody's listening to her because she doesn't have lawyers. Another pause longer this time. All right, Marcus said finally. I'll be there. So he sat in the kitchen at 4:30 in the morning and went through everything one more time. Not because he needed to, he had it memorized, but because sitting still was not something he did well when something large was moving toward him. He heard a door. Claire appeared in the kitchen doorway in her gray sweater, the same one she'd been wearing the night he'd first walked in. Her hair was down. She looked like she hadn't slept either. She stopped when she saw him, looked at the spread of papers, looked at him. You don't have to do this, she said. You've said that. I'm saying it again. She came to the counter, picked up the police report, set it back down. Ethan, these are your company's numbers, your professional reputation. I've been teaching for 6 years. I can find another school if I have to. This is your life's work. It's paper, he said. The reputation is paper. It's not just paper, and you know it. Then it's paper I can afford to lose, he said. He looked up at her. She stayed up half the night reading to my daughter. She leaves the hall light on. She learned that Lily takes her orange juice with exactly half a glass of water because that's how her mother made it, and she does it every morning without saying anything about it, without making it a thing. He stopped. His voice had gone somewhere he hadn't entirely planned on taking it. He pulled it back. Nobody made her do any of that. She did it because she's that kind of person. And I am not going to sit in my office while a school board makes her defend herself for it. Claire was very still. The orange juice, she said quietly. Lily mentioned it once, he said. 2 months ago. I don't think she even realized she'd said it. Claire looked at him for a long moment. He couldn't entirely read her expression. It was layered in the way her expressions sometimes were something careful on the surface, and something much less careful underneath. Okay, she said finally. Okay. She pulled out the stool across from him and sat down. Then let me help you prepare. I know these board members. I know how they think. She reached for the nearest stack of papers. Walk me through what you're planning to say. They sat at the kitchen island until 6:15 going through it together. She knew things he didn't. The particular sensitivities of the board chair, a woman named Patricia Holloway, who had been at the school for 20 years and whose primary concern always was the children. Claire told him to lead with Lily, not as a strategy, as the truth that this situation had begun because of Lily, had continued because of Lily, and that the person sitting across that table had made his daughter's life measurably better in the hardest month she'd had since losing her mother. "If you lead with the legal documents," Claire said, "Holloway sees a defense. If you lead with Lily, she sees a child." "You're good at this," he said. "I've been navigating school politics for 6 years," she said. "It's basically diplomacy with better snacks." He looked at her. In the kitchen light at 6 in the morning, with the fraud documents spread between them, and a board meeting 2 hours away, she was composed in a way that he found, if he was honest with himself, fairly remarkable. She had more to lose than he did, in one very specific sense: her daily life, her routine, the 6 years of relationships she'd built at that school, and she was sitting here helping him make his argument. "Why aren't you angrier?" he asked. She tilted her head. "About what?" "All of it. You got scammed out of your apartment. You got dragged into my life. Your job is on the line because of a photograph. You're up at 6 in the morning helping me prepare a defense you didn't ask for." He met her eyes. Most people would be furious. She thought about it. "I was furious," she said. "That first week. I was very angry." A pause. "And then Lily drew me that picture." He remembered the crayon drawing on the refrigerator. He hadn't asked about it. "She drew the 3 of us," Claire said. "In the apartment. She labeled it home, with the quotation marks which she's been doing to every word lately. I don't know where she picked that up." A small smile. "And I thought, okay, there is something worth not being furious about." He didn't say anything. He looked at the counter. "You're a difficult person to live with," she said. "I know. You're also—" She stopped, seemed to decide something. "You're trying. I can see that you're trying. And for someone who clearly hasn't tried in a while, it's noticeable." "That's either a compliment or a very gentle indictment." "It's both," she said. "That's kind of my whole thing." The board meeting was at 9 a.m. in the school's administrative conference room, which seated 12 and had the particular atmosphere of institutional authority. Dark wood table, framed photographs of distinguished alumni. A carpet that had not been replaced since the previous decade. Patricia Holloway sat at the head. 6 board members flanked her, 3 on each side. 2 parent representatives, the families who had filed the complaints, sat to the right. Principal Hartman was at the far end, looking like a man who had not chosen this particular Friday. Claire sat to Ethan's left. Marcus sat to his right. The complaints, as read into record, were what he'd expected. Concerns about professional conduct. The appearance of an inappropriate relationship between a faculty member and a student's parent. The potential impact on Lily Cole's educational environment. And the one that made Ethan's jaw tighten, a suggestion that Claire had pursued the connection with the student's family for personal benefit. He waited until they'd finished. Then he said, "May I speak?" Holloway nodded. He didn't open the folder of documents on the table in front of him. He decided that in the kitchen that morning, listening to Claire. Lead with the truth. The documents would follow. "My daughter's name is Lily," he said. "She's 8 years old. Her mother, my wife, died of cancer 26 months ago. Lily spent the last 2 years watching me work, watching me leave, watching me come back late and leave early and manage everything around her with the same efficiency I manage a company." He paused. "I told myself that providing was the same as being present. I was wrong about that. I didn't know I was wrong until recently." The room was quiet. "Approximately 6 weeks ago," he said, "I purchased the penthouse apartment at 53 the Alderton in Manhattan. On the same evening I took possession of the property. I discovered that a woman was already living there. She had a signed lease with a company called Alderton Property Solutions, a company that does not exist that was operating a rental fraud scheme across 3 boroughs, and that has since been the subject of a police investigation." He opened the folder, slid the police report toward the center of the table. "That woman was Claire Bennett, my daughter's teacher." He watched Holloway's face. She was reading the report. "Ms. Bennett had given notice on her previous apartment," he continued. "She had nowhere to go. My attorney advised me that because of the pending fraud investigation, requesting her immediate removal could complicate the legal proceedings. She stayed, temporarily, in a guest room, in an arrangement that was, I want to be very precise here, entirely logistical, fully documented and visible to my attorney, my building management, and the fraud investigative unit of the NYPD. He slid the rest of the documents across one at a time, clean and sequential. The lease agreement between Claire and the ghost company, his property deed, Marcus's legal summary, the building management correspondence, the timeline. The photograph that generated these complaints, he said, was taken at a school fundraiser that I attended because my daughter asked me to come. The last two fundraisers I sent my assistant. I came to this one. He looked at Holloway directly. If we are treating the fact that a parent attended his daughter's school event as evidence of impropriety, then I'm not sure what we're actually protecting here. One of the parent representatives shifted in her seat. He didn't look at her. Ms. Bennett has taught at this school for 6 years, he said. In the 6 weeks she has lived in my home under circumstances neither of us chose. She has, without being asked, without any expectation of compensation or recognition, made my daughter's life better in ways that I did not manage to do myself. She learned how Lily takes her orange juice. She learned that Lily wakes up sometimes at night and gets scared in the dark and needs a light in the hallway. She sat with my daughter and read to her and made her feel safe in a home that I bought to be a fresh start and had not yet made into anything. His voice held. He was careful with it. I am not here because this is a legal matter. I'm here because this is a question of what's true. And what's true is that Ms. Bennett has done nothing wrong, not professionally, not personally, not by any standard that a room full of people who care about children should be applying. He stopped. The room was very quiet. Patricia Holloway looked at the documents. Then she looked at Claire. Ms. Bennett, she said, do you have anything you'd like to add? Claire had been still throughout. She looked at Holloway steadily and said, only that I love this job. I've loved it for 6 years. I don't make decisions in my personal life or in the decisions that are made for me like housing fraud based on what it might mean for my career. I make them based on what's right. A pause. And I think being kind to a child who is grieving is right, whether or not it complicates things for anyone in this room. Holloway looked at her for a long moment. Then she looked at the board. The deliberation took 11 minutes. Marcus timed it. When Holloway came back, she said, the board finds no basis for a conduct review. Ms. Bennett, you will continue in your position. This matter is closed. She looked at the two parent representatives with an expression that communicated with complete precision and zero vulgarity that she considered the matter to have been a waste of everyone's Friday morning. Thank you all. Outside the conference room in the hallway, Claire stood with her arms crossed and her head slightly bowed and said nothing for a moment. Marcus excused himself to take a call. Ethan stood beside her. Okay, she said finally, quietly. Okay, he said. She looked up. Her eyes were bright in the way of someone who has been holding something tightly for a long time and has just been told they can put it down. That thing you said, she said, about the orange juice. It was relevant. You said it in front of 7 board members and 2 lawyers. Still relevant. She looked at him. A long, clear look, the kind she gave him sometimes that made him feel like she was reading something he hadn't written down. Why did you do this? She said. The real reason. Not the legal thing, not the truth thing. Why? He had known she was going to ask this. He had not prepared an answer because the answer was not the kind of thing he prepared. Because you were right, he said. The first morning, when you told me she notices. He held her gaze. I've been not noticing for 2 years. And you noticed. Without making a production of it. Without expecting anything back. He stopped. I don't know how to do that yet. But I would like to learn how to do that. Claire was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, that might be the most honest thing you've said since I met you. I'm working on it, he said. She uncrossed her arms. The brightness in her eyes settled into something warmer, less precarious. Okay, she said. Then let's go get your daughter from school. They walked out of the building into the November air, and Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in 2 years. Not happiness exactly, not yet, but the specific sensation of a man who has stopped running and is for the first time standing still in a place he might actually want to stay. The days that followed were quieter, not easier. The business press ran 3 pieces on the fraud, and his COO called twice about optics, and Diane called once more carefully to say that Margaret had decided not to pursue the custody conversation. Not because the threat had been empty, but because Diane had apparently sat with her mother and said simply and plainly that Lily was happy, that Lily was laughing again, and that Sarah would have wanted that more than any of the rest of it. Ethan received this news standing in his office, and he said, "Thank you, Diane." And after he hung up, he sat down and thought about his wife for a long time. Not the managed, careful way, the full way. He thought about who she was and what she would have made of the last 2 years, and what she would have said to him specifically if she could have. He thought she probably would have said it the way Claire had said it that night in the hallway. "You're here now. That's not nothing." He moved differently through the apartment after that. Not dramatically, he was still himself. Still the man who checked his phone too much and made the coffee too strong and worked too late on Tuesdays. But he left his office door open more. He sat at the kitchen island when he had calls he could take from anywhere. He asked Lily about her day in a way that invited more than a yes or no, and when she talked, which she did at length about things that mattered only to her, he listened. Actually, listened. Not processed. Listened. One afternoon, he came home early and found Claire grading papers at the island, and Lily doing something complicated with colored paper at the other end, and neither of them looked up when he walked in, which meant they were used to him. Which meant he was in some unscheduled, unlegislated way expected. He sat down with his laptop and worked in the same room. He didn't go to his office. He didn't say anything about it, and neither did they. But Lily, without looking up from her colored paper, reached over and tugged his sleeve. One small motion, the way she used to when she was very little, and wanted to make sure he was still there, and then went back to her work. He covered her hand with his for a second. Then they all worked in the same room in the particular quiet that belongs only to people who are comfortable enough with each other not to need noise. And outside November moved toward winter. The city kept going the way the city always does. Indifferent electric full of 8 million lives, moving at their own speeds. But on the 53rd floor of the Alderton, something was changing its shape. Slowly. Honestly. The way real things change without announcement. Without a single clean moment, you can point to just the accumulation of ordinary days that turn out, when you look back, to have been building something all along. Claire was still technically a temporary arrangement. Nobody mentioned that anymore. The fraud case closed on a Wednesday in early December, which was also the day the last legal reason for Claire to stay disappeared. Marcus called at 10:15 in the morning. The man behind Alderton Property Solutions had pleaded guilty. Claire's deposit and prepaid rent would be returned minus what the court had already allocated to other victims, which meant she'd recover about 60% of what she'd lost. Her legal standing in the apartment, already thin, was now formally resolved. She was on paper a guest whose circumstance had expired. Ethan sat with his phone in his hand for a long time after Marcus hung up. He didn't go to Claire immediately. He went to the window, the one that faced east, the one he'd stood at 100 times in the past 2.5 months, thinking about things he didn't have words for yet. The city was doing what it did in December. Cold and bright and moving forward the way it always moved, with that particular Manhattan energy that made personal crises feel both enormous and strangely small against all that motion. He thought about what he was going to say. He thought about all the things he'd gotten wrong in 2 years, and the specific narrow way he'd started getting them less wrong in the past 6 weeks. He thought about the kitchen island, and the hall light, and the orange juice, and the board meeting, and the night in the hallway, when he'd stopped holding everything up alone. He thought about Lily drawing the 3 of them in crayon and labeling it home. He thought about Claire sitting across from him that first morning with a mug of coffee she'd made in his kitchen, saying she notices, and how that had been. If he was honest, the first useful thing anyone had said to him in longer than he wanted to admit. He was not a man who said things before he was ready. He had spent his entire professional life being precise about timing, knowing when to speak, when to hold, when the moment called for action, and when it called for patience. It was the skill that had made him very good at his work, and very bad at his life. But he was 40 years old. He had turned 40 quietly 3 weeks ago, a birthday that Lily had remembered and Claire had somehow known about, and they had appeared in his office doorway at 7 p.m. with a piece of chocolate cake on a plate, and Lily in her pajamas, saying, "You're not allowed to work tonight." And he was standing at a window in an apartment that had stopped feeling like a transaction sometime around mid-October, and he had run out of reasons to wait. He went and found her. She was in her room. The door was open. She was packing. He stopped in the doorway. She had one suitcase open on the bed, the same one that had been in the corner of the room since she'd moved the rest of her things into storage 6 weeks ago. And she was folding clothes with the focused, quiet efficiency of someone who has already made a decision and is now executing it before they can reconsider. She looked up when she saw him. "Marcus called you too," he said. It wasn't a question. "He called me first," she said. She kept folding. "He wanted to make sure I understood the timeline. Very thorough, your lawyer." "He is." Ethan leaned against the doorframe. "You don't have to do this today." "I know." She set a folded sweater into the suitcase. "But I think I should." "Why?" She stopped, looked at him. "Because if I don't do it today, I'm not going to do it." She said it plainly without drama, the way she said most true things. "And I need to do it. Ethan, She paused, choosing her words with that care she sometimes used. The care that meant the thing underneath was not small. This was supposed to be temporary. We said that on day 1. Ground rules. Temporary arrangement. "People change the terms," he said. "Not always for the right reasons." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "What would the right reason be?" She looked at him steadily. "Not gratitude," she said. "Not proximity. Not the fact that 2 people have been in the same apartment for 2 months, and the alternative is disruption." She picked up another sweater, didn't fold it, set it back down. "I don't want to be the woman who was just convenient. Who was there when you needed something warm in a cold apartment. I want to be someone you would have found regardless. Someone worth the actual effort." Her voice was even, but her hands had stopped moving. "Does that make sense?" "Yes," he said. "It makes complete sense." "Okay." She picked up the sweater again. "I went looking," he said. She paused. "At the auction," he said. "The fundraiser. The painting I bid on, the one Marcus processed without me seeing the receipt until after. I went back and looked at it when it arrived. It's a kitchen window with light coming through it. I don't know why I bid on it. I wasn't thinking about it consciously. But I have it in my office now, and I look at it every day, and I know." He stopped, steadied himself. He was not a man who stumbled over words, but he was also not a man who had said this particular thing before, and those 2 facts were in direct conflict at the moment. "I know that the reason I look at it every day is that it reminds me of 6 weeks ago when I came home to an apartment that smelled like someone was cooking dinner, and I didn't know what to do with that feeling. But I know now that it's the best feeling I've had in 2 years. And it didn't happen because you were convenient. It happened because of who you are." Claire was very still. "I had a whole speech planned," he said. "It was better than this." Something moved across her face, that layered expression, the one he'd spent 2 months learning to read. "What happened to it?" "I saw you packing and it went away." She looked at him for a long moment. The suitcase was open between them, half full, the practical evidence of an ending she'd decided to give herself before someone gave it to her. "I'm scared," she said quietly. "I want you to know that. I'm not this composed person who has it all figured out. I spent 10 years watching my mother stay in a situation that was comfortable instead of good, because leaving was harder than staying, and I made myself a promise a long time ago that I would not do that. So I am standing here packing because I am terrified that what I feel right now is just warmth, proximity, Two people in a hard situation who made it easier for each other. And I don't know how to tell the difference. I do, he said. She looked at him. Because I have been in proximity to a lot of people in the last 2 years, he said. My attorney, my COO, my sister-in-law, my building manager, the therapist I stopped seeing 14 months ago. None of them made me want to leave my office door open. He held her gaze. You're the first person in 2 years who made me feel like being in the same room was better than being alone. That's not proximity. I know what proximity feels like. It feels like nothing. She was quiet for a long time. The city moved outside. Somewhere in the apartment, the refrigerator hummed. This is going to be complicated, she said. Your life is complicated. My job is complicated. Lily is 8 years old and she's already attached. And if this goes wrong, he said, it will be because I did something stupid, not because we tried. He paused. And I am for the first time in 2 years trying to stop doing stupid things. That surprised a sound out of her, not quite a laugh, but something close, something real and unguarded. She pressed her hand to her mouth for a second, and then lowered it. And when she looked at him, her eyes were bright again. That brightness he'd seen at the board meeting, the particular shine of something that has been held tightly for too long. Okay, she said. He took a breath. Okay as in, don't make me say it twice. She looked at the suitcase. And help me unpack this because I folded everything in a very specific order and I don't want to start over. He looked at the suitcase. You want me to unpack it? You put me in this room, she said. The least you can do is help me put things back. He crossed the room. He picked up the sweater she'd set down. He had absolutely no idea how she'd been folding things, so he just held it. And she looked at him, and she took it from his hands, with a look that suggested she was going to be doing most of the work here, and that was fine. That was probably going to be a theme, and he thought he could live with that. He thought, in fact, that he could live with quite a lot. He called Margaret that evening. He hadn't planned to. He'd been thinking about it for 3 weeks, since Diane had called to say the custody conversation had been set aside, and he'd kept almost calling, and then finding a reason not to. But he sat at the kitchen island after dinner. Lily in bed, Claire reading in the living room, the apartment quiet in the specific way it was quiet now, full rather than empty, and he dialed. She picked up on the third ring. Ethan, Margaret. He had nothing prepared. He'd learned recently that preparing sometimes got in the way. I wanted to call. I should have called sooner. A pause. Yes, she said. Not unkind, just honest. He respected that about her. She'd always been honest, even when it was inconvenient. It was something her daughter had gotten from her. Lily is doing well, he said. She's doing well, Margaret. She laughs more than she has since Sarah. She's eating breakfast. She set her alarm herself last week for the first time and came to the kitchen ready before I was. He paused. I didn't do that. I want to be honest with you, I didn't do that alone. I had help. Silence on the line. I know you saw the article, he said. I know what it looked like. The real situation is in the police report, which Marcus can send you if you want it. But I'm not calling about the legal thing. He looked at the kitchen at the counter where the coffee maker sat, the refrigerator with Lily's drawings on it, the island where he'd had more real conversations in the past 2 months than in the previous 2 years. I'm calling because I owe you the truth, and the truth is that I have not been the father I should have been. I've been present in the way that means I was in the building, not in the way that means I was there. He swallowed. I'm working on it. And I have someone who has helped me understand what that difference looks like. Another long pause. When Margaret spoke, her voice was quieter. She left the light on, she said. Lily told me. On our call last week. She said she wakes up sometimes, and she knows where she is because there's a light under the door. Yes, Ethan said. Sarah used to do that, Margaret said. When Lily was a baby. She'd leave the hall light on and crack the door so Lily could see it from her crib. A pause. She told me once that she wanted Lily to always know, even in the dark, that someone was right there. Ethan sat very still. "I'd like to meet her," Margaret said. "Whenever that's right. No pressure, no lawyers. I'd just like to meet the person my granddaughter talks about the way she talks about Miss Bennet." "I'll make that happen," he said. After he hung up, he sat at the island for a while. The apartment was quiet. He could hear faintly the sound of Claire turning a page in the living room. He thought about Sarah. He let himself think about her the full way, the real way, and he thought about the light under the door, and the 26 months it had been dark, and the woman in the next room who had turned it back on, without knowing what she was restoring. He thought, thank you. Not to anyone in the room, just out into the air. The way you send things when there's nowhere else to send them. Malak. The idea for the fund came to him the way the best ideas always did. Not in a meeting, not in front of a whiteboard, but at an inconvenient moment when he wasn't trying to think of anything. He was at Lily's school 2 weeks before winter break, picking her up for the first time on a Wednesday. He'd rearranged his schedule to do it personally, 3 days a week, which his COO had noted with diplomatic surprise, and which Ethan had explained by saying only that it was a priority shift. He was standing in the pickup line when he overheard 2 teachers talking near the entrance. He wasn't eavesdropping, there was nowhere else to stand, and they weren't being discreet. One of them was saying that she'd had to move 3 times in the past 2 years because rental prices kept outpacing her salary. That she was looking at a 40-minute commute from the outer boroughs because Manhattan was no longer manageable. That she loved the job, loved the kids, loved the school, but that the logistics of staying were getting harder every year. The other teacher said, I know someone who got scammed on a rental last fall, lost 2 months of savings. The first teacher said, it's getting predatory out there. Ethan stood in line and listened, and thought about Claire, about the 60% she'd recovered, about the 40% that was gone, about the fact that she'd been targeted in the first place. Because she'd been looking for something affordable, in a city that had stopped being affordable for people who did the work that held everything together. By the time Lily appeared at the door and ran to him, backpack flying something in her hand that turned out to be a self-portrait in watercolor, quite good actually. Unmistakably her, he had most of it worked out in his head, he told Claire that evening. She was at the island. He sat across from her and laid it out the same way he'd laid out the board presentation. Clean, sequential, but different in texture, because this wasn't an argument he was making. It was something he was asking her to weigh in on. The Cole Bennett Housing Initiative, named both of them, which he'd decided without asking her, and which he told her now with the specific awareness that she might object. She looked at him for a long moment. You named it after me. I named it after the reason it exists, he said. If you hate it, we can change it. I don't hate it. She looked down at the counter. I just don't. I'm not used to being the reason something exists. Usually, I'm just the person in the background making things work. I know, he said. That's exactly why. The fund, as he described it, would provide housing assistance to public school teachers and single parents in the 5 boroughs' emergency rental support fraud recovery assistance, transitional housing access, first and last month coverage for those who qualified. He had the structure mostly mapped. He needed a board. He had 3 names already from his network. I want you on the board, he said. Not as a figurehead, as someone who actually knows what this situation looks like from the inside. She was quiet for a moment. I'm a 3rd-grade teacher who navigated a housing scam, a fraud investigation, a board inquiry, and 60% loss recovery in 6 weeks without losing her job or her composure, he said. You're exactly who should be making these decisions. She looked at him in that way she had reading something he hadn't quite written. Then she said, Okay, yes. Just like that. When something is clearly right, you say yes, she said. That's kind of how I make decisions. He thought about that. He thought about how different that was from how he made decisions, the analysis, the contingency, planning, the exit strategies. He thought about how many things he'd made complicated that might have just been clearly right. I'm learning that, he said. I know, she said. You're getting better at it. Bang. The school's winter assembly was on the last Friday before break. Each class did something. 3rd grade had written short speeches on the theme the teachers had assigned in November. What does home mean to you? Lily had worked on hers for 2 weeks. She'd shown it to Claire twice and to Ethan once, swearing him to secrecy about the content which he'd honored even when she'd left the draft on the kitchen counter and he'd had to actively look away. He sat in the auditorium next to Claire. Margaret was on his other side. She'd driven down from Westchester, which was the first time she'd been in the same room as Claire, and which Ethan had quietly managed by arriving early and making sure the seating made introduction inevitable and comfortable. Margaret had shaken Claire's hand and said, "I've heard quite a lot about you," in the specific tone of a woman who reserves judgment, but has already behind it formed one. Claire had said, "All from Lily, I hope." And Margaret had smiled, really smiled, and said, "Every word." Ethan had exhaled. 3rd grade was the 4th group. He watched Lily walk to the front of the room, small and straight, her dark hair in the braid that Claire had done that morning at her request, holding her index cards with both hands the way she'd practiced. She looked out at the auditorium. Found him. Found Claire. Found Margaret. The corners of her mouth moved. She looked back at her cards. Then she looked back up and put the cards down on the podium, and Ethan understood, in the particular way you understand things about your child, that nobody tells you that she'd decided she didn't need them. "Home isn't the place you buy," she said. Her voice was clear and steady in the way of a child who has thought carefully about what she wants to say. "My dad bought a really nice place, 53rd floor. You can see all of Manhattan. But that's not what made it home." She paused. "My mom died 2 years ago. After that, home was kind of just where we slept. My dad worked a lot. I tried not to bother him because I knew he was sad even though he didn't say it." Another pause. "And then someone moved in by accident. And she left the light on in the hallway. And she learned how I like my orange juice. And she sat with me when I couldn't sleep. And my dad started leaving his door open." The auditorium was very quiet. "Home isn't the place you buy," Lily said again. "It's the people who stay." She picked up her index cards, walked back to her seat. The applause started before she'd sat down, the warm, involuntary kind that happens when a room has been moved beyond its intention. Ethan did not clap immediately. He sat with his hands in his lap for a second because his hands were not entirely steady and he needed a moment. Claire's hand found his. She didn't say anything. She just held it briefly firmly and then let go and started clapping with everyone else. He clapped too. Margaret on his other side was pressing a folded tissue to the corner of her eye with the dignified composure of a woman who would not be seen crying at a 3rd grade assembly, but was also not going to pretend that something hadn't just happened. "She's extraordinary," Margaret said quietly. "She is," Ethan said. "She really is."
Shinka-san.
3 weeks later, on a Saturday evening in January, that was sharp and cold, in the way only New York Januaries can be, the kind of cold that makes the whole city feel clarified, stripped down to what it actually is, Ethan took Lily to a bookstore on the Upper West Side because she'd been requesting it for a month, and he'd finally run out of deferrals. They were there for an hour. Lily selected 4 books with the focused intention of a person who has been given a budget and intends to optimize it. Ethan stood in the architecture section and looked at a book about residential design and didn't buy it and put it back and stood there anyway because the store was warm and his daughter was happy 3 aisles over and there was no meeting to get back to. His phone buzzed. "Claire, there's soup if you're hungry when you get back." He looked at the message for a moment. He thought about the first night, the smell of garlic and rosemary, and the woman with the wooden spoon, and a life already installed in his apartment. He thought about how far that was from here. He thought about how little distance it actually was measured in time and how much it was in everything else. He typed back, "We'll be home in 20 minutes. He looked at the word, left it. Lily appeared at the end of the aisle with 4 books and an expression of complete satisfaction. "Ready," she said. "Ready," he said. They walked out into the January cold together. Lily's hand in his, 4 books in a bag. The city doing what it always did. Indifferent and electric, and full of 8 million lives all moving at their particular speeds. He flagged a cab, held the door. Lily climbed in and slid to the window the way she always did, and he slid in beside her, and she leaned against his arm, the way she'd leaned against him in the elevator on the night everything had changed. Small and warm and certain, in the way children are certain when they know they're safe. "Daddy," she said. "Yeah. I think Miss Bennet should just stay." He looked out the window at the city going past. "Yeah," he said. "I think so too." She seemed satisfied with that. She looked out her window. He looked out his. The cab moved uptown through the January dark, and above them the buildings climbed toward a sky that was clear and cold and full of more stars than you could usually see in Manhattan, which meant the night was very cold indeed, and the city was for once letting something through. 53rd floor. The light was on in the kitchen window. He could see it from the street. And Ethan Cole, who had spent 2 years moving through his life like a man with nowhere particular to arrive, looked up at that light and felt finally the full weight and grace of what it meant to be going home.